So here we're going to look at evolution, getting it there from here, kind of helping explaining origin of certain structures, certain organisms, and certain species. So starting with evolution in general, looking at this, we're seeing that there's evidence of macroevolution. And what macroevolution is the evolutionary change on a grand scale, large scale. This encompasses the origin of new species and major episodes of extinction. So macro, think just like it is, large scale changes. Microevolution are evolutionary changes, as you may guess, on a small scale. This encompasses genetic changes that will occur within populations over time. These changes are the result of changes in gene frequencies. So we see here our gene frequencies for certain colors have changed in these butterfly wings. Here we also have the squirrels. We have our gray squirrel, our black squirrel, and our albino white squirrel here. These would be microevolutions because it's simply a change in color. They're all still squirrels. They're all still butterflies and wings here. We're just seeing a microevolution change. This could really impact whether or not an individual can survive or not, but still it's considered a microevolution, a small change, versus a macro, which is a large-scale change. So putting it together, macro refers to the changes in organisms over time that are so important that the newer organism would be considered a whole new species. That's the best way to think of the macroevolution. Microevolution and macroevolution both happen in the same way and for the same reasons. But micro is more that kind of change in coloration, and macro is the potential extinction or creation of a new species there. And that's our comparison between the two. Getting there from here. So LaMarck here are many others prior to Darwin and Wallace, so that's different. We're talking prior to that, theories developed by those two, thought biological evolution occurred by what's called acquired characteristics. It's a trait that an organism develops through interactions with the environment. Individuals pass on offspring body and behavior changes acquired during their lives. So I gave some examples here, and this ends up not being the case. But for example, the manatee with the scars on the back, this happens usually with boats that run into them, sadly. Acquired characteristics mean if all the manatees had these scrape marks, eventually they would pass on these scrape marks to their offspring or individuals. If someone continually got pierced ears, eventually their offspring would have pierced ears naturally. And the black spots on the leaves here, eventually the offspring would have black spots in the leaves. This is the concept of acquired characteristics. Now again, this is not what happens, but this is what LaMarck thought, and this was his theory. So in contrast to Darwin and Wallace, they proposed variation is an inherited characteristic of all biological populations. So it's not created by an experience. It's readily observed in all populations. Again, just look around at the variants that we have. I put the example here of some shells. We see some different patterns, some different colorations. It's the idea that the body has a certain number and amount of genes. They get passed on to the egg for the embryo to then develop from. Our Punnett squares and our kind of odds of getting certain alleles and combinations. We see here again, number of alleles for height. Here's very short, here's very tall, here's the mean, the average. These acquired characteristics do not hold true. So going back here, we're not acquiring these characteristics, right? We are variation based on genetics. So that's not created by experience. That's created by the genetics of the individual, not the experience that the individual may or may not have. So LaMarck again, compared to Darwin, LaMarck was the idea of the giraffes is his primary example. So he came up with the idea that by reaching higher for vegetation, giraffes simply stretch their necks, and as a result, this results in them acquiring longer necks in their offspring. Darwin believed that giraffes were born with longer necks and are better able to survive, and therefore have more offspring who inherit longer necks. So again, this nice comparison between these two scientists at the time. And it holds true even today, scientists that debate one another. So we need to support our ideas with evidence, and this is how we develop and refine different theories. So LaMarck's environmental role was a stimulus to change. In Darwin, the environment's role was a selector. The organism's role in LaMarck was active, and Darwin it was passive. Right? It's the genes that you get. And this didn't change, and it's basically, regardless, it's a slow and gradual change, regardless of what scientist you look at. The key part is here, Darwin believed in the inherent of genetics, LaMarck believed in the acquired traits. And inherent is definitely with the DNA the way that this does occur. Evidence or standard view of Darwin was that evolutionary change occurred extremely slowly, and these changes accumulate such that over thousands or millions of years, major changes could occur. This term is called gradualism. And here's our horse that I explained in the overview of evolution. We see how it's changed both in size and structure, but it's occurred over a long period of time. Give the examples of over millions of years, we can get these major changes that occur. They occur slowly and over time, but over these millions of years, we get these large changes that can occur. And that's referred to the pace of evolution. So, punctuated equilibrium hypothesis. This is evolutionary change occurs in bursts separated by long periods of little or no evolutionary change. So we see here gradualism, where we're slowly getting a lighter and lighter and lighter color. Here, a punctuated equilibrium is where things definitely diverge and change. All of a sudden we get a white one, and that white basically doesn't change for this time period. And we get the kind of the more orange and reddish color, and tan color. Boom, that changes, and that stays pretty consistent for a long period of time. This is referred to as punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism refers to just slowly that change over time. Here, there's definitely these break-off points, and while it's a white one here, it stays a white one here. There's not constant changing that's occurring. There's abrupt changes that occur in the time scale. So examples of both gradualism and punctuated equilibrium do exist. So speciation clearly occurs in different ways. This would be the same example here of starting with the green butterfly and progressing to these two colors with gradualism, and here's how it would look with punctuated equilibrium. Have the idea that speciation is necessarily linked to phenotypic change has not been supported. So we're seeing that speciation can occur without phenotypic change, and phenotypic change can occur within a species in the absence of speciation. So we're looking at that morphological change. We're not looking in any of these cases at the genetics, we're just looking at the phenotypic changes. Rate of replication, different organisms do evolve at different rates. Bacteria evolve much faster than eukaryotes because they have a simpler base pair unit in their genome. So they can occur much faster. Versus mammals, amphibians, and flowering plants, a much larger, again this is base pairs, many more base pairs. So it takes a lot longer for these to change enough genes to cause a shift in that organism. Again, the rate of evolution, that punctuated equilibrium, is that branching that occurs, and gradualism is that steady change over time. The genome size, again the base pairs, is more of a visual, the mutation rate, and the genome size. We see that the larger the genome size, the longer it takes. So viruses can change very quickly, and relatively speaking, compared to eukaryotes. This is what makes viruses a little bit harder to kind of combat, control, because they can change from year to year. Eukaryotes can also change, but it takes them millions of years, a lot slower rate of evolution. Still occurs, again it can be gradualism or the punctuated, but the rate that the change occurs is dependent on the mutation rate, which changes based on the base pair or the number of base pairs that individual organism has for DNA sequences.